Hey guys, it's Tyler and Nate from Roxy Music, a music store that's been in business since 1939. And today we're answering your questions on music theory. Stick around if you want to learn more about intervals, scales, and the circle of fifths. I love music theory.
Me too. I love talking about the ins and outs of what we're playing and getting nerdy about it and stuff like that. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah. And it's kind of like a niche conversation. Like,
it's proof that music is just another language, right? That we can use to communicate with, and that's what music theory helps us do. Right.
So first we got to figure out what the heck is music theory.
Right. So what do you think? What if you had to say, what would...
When I was doing research and I looked it up, the definition is the study of practices and possibilities of music.
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah.
I think, functionally, that's confusing in itself, right? Yeah. I mean, like...
It is correct.
Yeah, it sounds official, right? But
yes.
what does that tell you, or what does that help you do, right?
Yes, it is a correct definition. I think my definition would be we're naming sounds and how they're used.
I totally agree with you. I think it's way simpler than everybody makes it out to be.
Yes.
And one thing that I always tell people is that music theory is descriptive, right? We use it to describe stuff that already happened. Yeah. We don't need it for performance. Like, it's not a performative thing that you need to study. In the same way we're sitting here having this conversation, we learned about the English language when we were little kids, but I'm not thinking about nouns and pronouns. Yeah. We're just jamming.
Now, to be fair, there are some theory things you need, like what is a G note? That is music theory.
Correct.
Because it's just, we're naming what this sound is doing and how it relates to other sounds. Mm-hmm. And so notes, some music theory if you know note names.
That's correct.
You know chords, some music theory. It's simple. What gets complicated is people think it's like an unlocked key to playing, and it's really more just a reference tool for learning scales that help you.
Yeah. And I think, and talking to others about, if you're a musical director or something like that, you want to speak in the musical terms that the musicians around you are going to understand. And it's almost kind of like lingo and jargon in that same way too. Whereas, and we're finding out this just about ourselves. Meeting you, I might call one thing another thing, and you call it something completely different. We find out we're talking about the same thing, and as you studied here, you picked up this along the way, and.
There are some theory things that are useful to learn, like notes.
The note names is a huge one.
Yes.
That's I think that's glaring obvious example. Yeah. We can walk up to a piano and just start playing it, right? But the first thing that everybody wants to know is what is the name of this note?
And the note name doesn't mean anything. It's just a name we assign to it.
We all agree on them.
Yes.
Right. And
but scales. That will really help you if you memorize all your scales and chords that go with that.
Absolutely.
The easiest way is just to say, this is a G, this is the scale, you play it 100 times.
And then you play.
But there are tricks we can do. And the circle of fifths actually has some cool tricks to help you learn those things.
I agree.
And that was one of the biggest questions we got when we were asking about this video. So let's talk about it.
Well, I think to get to the circle fifths, we should talk about a couple of different things that we're going to be, like terminology we'll be using. Like, obviously, notes are referring to pitches.
Yes.
And another big thing that we're going to talk about is intervals.
Yes.
Sort of the distance between the notes that you hear. And obviously, we name these intervals typically. Yes. The smallest version of these intervals are from one note to the very next note above it. And we a lot of times call that a half step.
Yep.
And then a whole step would be double that distance. You go two notes away.
But that's not the actual interval name for those.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Those are basic terms that we use.
Yes.
But a half step and a whole step are actually the intervals of a minor second and a major second, respectively. So those are two interchangeable terms that you'll hear musicians use, and that can be confusing right off the bat. But knowing that will help you.
Yes. If you know half step and whole step, that's more common, I think.
I think so.
Now, are there only seconds? What other intervals do we have?
So going up from there, we're referring to degrees of a scale is
Yeah.
where we get these numbers from, right? So that second interval is the distance from one note of a scale to the very next note of the scale. So it will be different sizes. Now the next interval class after that would be the thirds.
Yep.
Obviously we're going to keep going up that list, and it's the same thing, but we're skipping one more note in the scale. And then there's go ahead.
Yeah, and easy, like, here's a tricky thing with intervals, like, the distance between the notes stays the same no matter where the starting note is.
Okay, yeah.
So, like, if you start on a C on a piano, and we'll try and get, like, a piano overlay on this.
Yes.
If you start on a C on a piano, and then you go to an E, that is a third.
Correct.
But there are 3 notes in between, and you count 4 notes, because it's C. Well, you don't start on C, you start on C sharp, D, D sharp, E.
That's correct.
But it's a third because of scales, which we'll talk about in a second.
Yes, that's right. The name of the interval, the number name of the interval, is pretty much talking about how many scale tones you're going to be moving from note to note.
But the same amount of notes are in between. So if you did the same thing with F
That's correct.
and go to a third, it's A.
That's
and
right.
it's F, F sharp, G, G sharp,
An A. So we would say that distance of a major third is 4 half steps.
Yes.
All right. And so we can kind of assign distances within those intervals.
And every interval has that, and that's. I did make a blog. There is a blog post on our website talking more about this. If you want to learn more about intervals, it's roxymusic.com and Roxy Updates.
Heck yeah. So with now we can kind of talk about our scales
Yeah.
and our intervals and relationship to the circle of fifths. Now, what is the circle of fifths?
So a fifth is an interval.
Correct.
It's a fifth. So it's
5 scale tones away.
but not 5 notes.
That's correct. That's correct. And some terminology that might be a little bit confusing too is you'll hear people say perfect fifth
Yes.
as opposed to major or minor. We were describing the other intervals with those common major and minor terms, but we use perfect for the fourth, the intervals of a fourth and the intervals of a fifth, because when we invert those intervals, they're another fourth or another fifth. A perfect interval, if we take the bottom note up 1 octave, it will still be a perfect interval. Whereas if we take a major third and invert that interval, that turns into a minor sixth. So perfect is just a fancy term for music theory nerd.
Yeah, like the minor intervals, that's usually outside of a major scale. And like if you not understanding that, like pause on those and like focus on the major scale, which, speaking of the major scale,
Correct.
that is most music is built on.
Correct. When we start learning, usually in music theory classes in school and stuff like that, we start with functional harmony that comes from learning about the major scale.
Yeah. So what is the major scale?
So when I talk about major scales or scales at all within my music classes or lessons and stuff like that, I always use the definition of a collection of either half steps or whole steps.
Yeah.
A major scale always has that same arrangement of half steps and whole steps. Make a major scale, you can start on any note and then you go up 1 whole step to the second note, another whole step to the third note. Then from the third note to the fourth note is that half step. We only go 1 note. Then from 4 to 5 is another whole step. 5 to 6 is a whole step. 6 to 7 is a whole step. And that's our scale. We have 7 notes in our major scale, but we usually cap it off with a repeat of that first note. And that distance from the 7th note to our octave of our first note is another half step.
Yes.
So we have only 2 half step intervals that make up that major scale, and the rest are whole steps.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're also starting out and like it's kind of confusing, the easiest one to look at is the C major scale. If you're on piano, it's all the white keys starting on C. If you're on guitar or another instrument, it's just the normal notes with no sharps or flats.
The natural notes, yep.
Yes. So now we have a working understanding of scales, not arpeggios, chords,
scales and intervals.
Yes.
Then we can use those
can
scales
build chords.
to build chords, but we're not going to go there yet today. We're going to talk about one specific interval in that scale, right? We're going to go from the first note, and let's just live in C major here. It's easier to just use the letter names.
There's no sharps or flats like we said earlier.
So we'll go from the note C up to the fifth note of the scale, which is G.
Yep.
C, D, E, F, G is the fifth note.
Yeah.
So that is our interval of a fifth that we're going to deal with.
And another counting thing we did, so we didn't count it when we were going up half steps because you typically count half steps, but in a scale, the note you're first on is the first note.
That's correct.
It's a little confusing. There are confusing terminology things.
Yeah. So those would be, when we talk about the first note of a scale, we're talking about the degrees of the scale. That first note is the first note. But when it's an interval, it's the distance you're traveling that you're actually measuring, and that can be a really confusing thing.
Yeah, it is confusing. Hopefully we're breaking it down for you. If you have any questions, we're more than happy to answer.
Yeah. Okay, so we have our interval of a fifth, right? Okay, now if I start on a G, I want to find a fifth above there, right? But what I want to do is go from the G major scale to find my interval of a perfect fifth.
Yeah.
So it's simple enough when you're starting on G, we just go G, A, B, C, and then D is our next note. So as we're moving around, we started on C, then we're going to go to G, then we're going to go to D. Yeah. And if we keep following that pattern and starting on a major scale, playing a major scale of every new note that we get to, we'll eventually, through 12 steps, make it all the way back to C.
So that's how we build it.
Correct.
What does it do for us?
It's a reference table, right?
It's.
I think what it does best is show us the relationships between these keys.
Yeah. So, like, if you're out there playing and you're wanting to figure out, like, how to use it, it's not going to help your day-to-day playing. It's for you to figure out. Now, it can help you if you're, like, writing and trying to figure out how to do chord transition or key transition. It can be great for that. But as, like, just, I'm going to play these notes, the circle fifth isn't really designed to assist your playing a ton.
That's correct. Yeah, it's a theoretical tool, right? You can think of it as like a verb conjugation chart or something like that, right? I don't need to carry those around in my pocket to know how to, but I learned by using those tools. One great thing that it shows is the key signatures for if you're reading music. As you're going around the circle, if you go around the circle clockwise, and we're going up by fifths, so C, G, D, and then A, and so forth, what we're actually doing is we're adding a sharp, right?
And that helps you learn your scales.
That helps me memorize my scales. It helped me memorize the order of the sharps in the key signature.
So, like, there's tools to it, like, you can memorize scales, but it's not really a playing thing. It's not going to give you like interesting ideas.
I think you said it best. It's as a reference guide, right? One really handy thing that I always helped me learn and pick up along the way is if you look at C at the top of our circle, if you look on either side of that note C, if we go backwards one, we're going to be on F, and if we go forward one, we'll be on G, and those are F and G are the two major chords that are also in the key of C major. So you can see those three major chords that come with a key by moving one step forward and one step back. That's a super handy thing to be able to know. If you're writing a song and you want to know an idea for a good chord to go to that's kind of far away, you move to that next tonal center on your circle, and you're going to get some good sounds that way.
Yeah, so breaking down what you just said, so how would it work in A?
Okay, so I'm going to go around the circle. I'm going to go C, then we got G, then we got D, and then we have A. The next note after A around that circle is going to be the note E. So moving from A to E is a distance of a perfect fifth, and moving up, right? And then if I go backwards around my circle from A backwards to D, that would be moving down a perfect fifth or up a perfect fourth, right? We talked about inverting these intervals makes another perfect interval. Fourths and fifths are huge. So if I'm looking for the key of A and I want to know my two other major chords that come up in the key of A. I'll go backwards one on the fifth to D. That is my fourth scale degree of the key of A. And if I move forward on the fifth, I move from A to E, and E is the fifth scale degree of the key of A. Now, another thing that we learn about diatonic harmony, diatonic meaning everything's relating to one key.
Yeah. So it's all the notes, like in C, diatonic, you're only playing white keys.
Yep.
That's what that means.
So to those diatonic chords that come in certain keys always repeat our same patterns. And the major chords are based off the first scale degree, the fourth scale degree, and the fifth scale degree. And those are the two scale degrees that you see on either side of any note on the circle of fifths. I think that's super handy.
Yes, it is super handy. That's a great reference tool for it. Going up, you get a fifth. Going down, you get a fourth. And then the first, fifth, fourth, and fifth are the major chords in a key.
Those are the major chords in a key. And I think this is a good time to talk about this. We could talk about the relative minor keys. The circle of fifths will still apply there. You see it all the time written with the relative minor maybe as a lowercase letter on a smaller inside circle.
Yeah.
Now, a relative minor is cool. We're using all those same notes to build our scale from your relative major key.
Yes.
So an A minor scale has all the white keys. On the piano, we just start on A.
Yep.
You can memorize those orders of sharps and flats, but they're going to be the same order as the major scale, just starting from the sixth scale degree.
Yeah. Another cool thing, like we talked about how the 4, the 1, and the 5 all related to each other to make the 3 major chords.
Or major chords from a key.
Yeah. But if you look in the circle of fifths too, on that relative minor section, you'll see the A minor chord.
Correct.
Which if you use that chord, that's the 4 most common chords.
Yeah, that's your next most common chord, absolutely.
Like if you're ever, if you're trying to figure out how to use a circle of fifths, a great tool to practice is like look up a pop song, like one of your favorite songs, and figure out what key it's in. And then you'll see if you go on the circle of fifths on the key you're on, it'll probably have those 4 chords.
Those 4 chords.
It might have like 1 or 2 extras in there, but it's going to center around those 4, and that's most music, honestly.
Yeah, especially pop music that we listen to. I make the joke all the time. Yep, this song definitely uses all 4 chords, and those chords are 1, 4, 5, and 6.
And you can use the circle of fifths to show them. So, like, the 1 chord is the key you're on. So, like, if we're in the key of C, C is the 1. If you go to the next one, it's G.
That's 5.
Yeah. Then if you go back behind the C, it's F.
That's 4.
And then if you go to the relative minor,
which should be right underneath your C, that's going to show you that A minor, which is your 6.
And if that's all you take from this video, you'll learn something and you'll grow a lot in your theory knowledge.
That's correct. That's correct.
So what are some other cool things we can do with the circle of fifths?
When I was in college, I had this piano professor. He was a jazz guy. I was not a piano player. I took bass lessons from the piano player. And he said, the circle of fifths is dumb. Nobody uses it. And I was like, what are you talking about? I just got out of music theory class right before this and they were teaching me the circle of fifths. He goes, yeah, but you should go backwards. And I was like, why do you go backwards? He goes, because if you just make it the circle of fourths instead of the circle of fifths, you learn all the 2, 5, 1 chord progressions. So if you just go backwards through the circle, if you go C, then F, then B flat, C, F, B flat is a 2, 5, 1 chord progression. And in the jazz world, that is as common as using the 4 chord, the 5 chord, and going to the 1 chord.
Yeah, that's jazz music.
Yeah, and we practice our 2, 5, 1 turnarounds in all 12 keys. And if you look backwards around the circle, I guess it's this way, backwards around the circle of fourths, then you learn that. And what the other relationship that shows is it shows the 5 to 1 relationship. C to F is 5 to 1, sol to do, if you're doing the solfege thing. And that is to me, the basis of Western music. That moving up 1/4 to get to our tonic, to get to the root of our song, that makes stuff sounds like it's ending.
I didn't realize that till yesterday, and I'm like, Tyler, you're dumb. Like, what? That makes so much sense.
So that has been the most functional use I've got. It's helped me learn those 2-5-1 orders, and now they're ingrained up here.
Yeah.
Now we can do a million things with the 2-5-1 chord progression.
Yes.
And I think another valuable way, if you just want to practice playing through the circle of fifths, I'd recommend going backwards. It will sound like a lot more music that you've heard. And make them all dominant seventh chords.
Yeah.
If you make it C7, then you go to F7, then you go to B flat 7. This always has that 5-to-1 relationship that makes up so much of what we hear in Western music.
Another interesting thing about the circle of fourths, which is just backwards, it's the same pattern, it's just
Backwards.
It kind of works like the circle of fifths, where C has no flats, F has 1 flat,
Correct.
B flat has 2 flats.
Yep. So we're adding flats.
Yeah.
And you can, another interesting, fascinating thing to me is not necessarily adding flats, but taking away sharps, right? Or going the other way, we can be, we're still adding the flats or taking away flats instead of adding sharps. The bottom of the scale gets confusing, right? Everybody kind of has their own, the bottom of the circle. Yeah. Everybody has their own, I don't want to care about C flat major. I'm going to do B major, right? Or do you think C sharp or D flat? Yeah. Do you think C sharp or D flat?
Yeah.
I don't know.
D flat.
I like the flats better, but is that because I played in band growing up?
Sharps.
Yeah, I don't want 7 sharps. I would take 5 sharps or flats over the 7, which is the trade-off you're making. So that's a 6 of one, half a dozen of another type of thing, right?
But here's another cool trick with the circle of fifths. Let's go to A.
All right.
So A has 3 sharps.
Correct.
How many sharps or flats can you have in total?
I guess
You can have up to 7, right? 7
before, yeah. So we have 7 notes in a scale. So.
Yeah. A has 3 sharps. How many flats does A flat have?
Oh yeah, that's right. I remember this. A flat has 4 flats. So there's your, yep.
Works in every one. B has 5 sharps.
And B flat has 2 flats. And so we always
All
get.
adds up to 7.
Oh, we always add up to 7.
So,
I forgot about that one. That's a good one.
Yeah. So it all adds together so you can learn it really quickly. If you have any other questions on the circle of fifths, please let us know.